So the business cycle is, every 7 or 8 years, the stock market goes down, and then it goes up for a while, and then it goes down. Professor Richard Wolff weighs in on the speculation today that the Fed has figured out how to break the business cycle. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share our channel, and subscribe. The central banks have figured out how to break the business cycle. The business cycle, the boom and bust of the stock market kind of thing, that it seems to happen every 6, 8 years. And it hasn't happened in more than 20 years in Japan. It hasn't happened in, almost 2 decades in Australia. And so I wanted to get Dr. Wolff's thoughts on this. It's fascinating stuff. Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder, Democracy at Work, author most recently of Understanding Marxism, democracyatwork.info, and rdwolff with 2fs.com are his websites. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. Professor Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So you want to recap for us what the business cycle is and share your thoughts. I know we've discussed this or danced around this, I guess, in the past, but just head on. Is it possible that business cycle has been broken by interference by central banks, and is that what has happened in Japan and Australia?
I really don't think so. I think that the efforts of very smart people, smarter than me and you, over 2 centuries at least, to try to contain, to stop, to prevent the business cycle, they've all failed. That's why we're in a mess again today. We just had, in 2008, the second worst collapse after the 30s in the capitalist system. So no, my short answer is I don't think we've overcome it. I think what we're seeing is an extraordinary anxiety, and rightly so, on the people who are supposed to manage these cycles, at least make them less frequent, at least make them less cutting into the well-being of people, at least being shorter than they might otherwise be. We're seeing those people, and above all central banks, take absolutely extraordinary steps because they are so afraid of where in today's integrated world another downturn will take us. So we see, for example, more money being pumped in than we've ever seen before. Interest rates being lowered not only close to zero, but beyond zero into negative interest rates, which now exist all over the world and are being actively considered by the Fed in Washington as I'm speaking. So you see extreme measures taken, and so you shouldn't be surprised if you get the following extreme result. All that money available at such low interest rates has led to a crazy situation. Here's what it is. Money is being borrowed in record amounts, pumped into the economy by central banks everywhere, and mostly it's going into 2 things. 1, buying shares of stock so that stock markets go up, even though the underlying economy doesn't justify doing that because there's so much money sloshing around in the stock markets that the prices are driven up. And number 2, wild amounts of money is simply being lent to the government so it can continue to spend money because, frankly, the private sector can't do it or won't do it. And so you're getting weird results. And again, just 2 examples. 1, stock markets keep going up, leading politicians to point to them, like Mr. Trump, as if that were a sign of economic health, when it ought to be worrying you sick that the stock market's prices are bearing less and less relationship to the underlying economic reality. And the second thing that ought to worry you is that the level of debt in our world is gone crazy. Personal debt of individuals, corporate debt, and government debt are all at record levels, so that when finally the crash that is building and that most people see when it finally hits, we are in for a doozy, as in a sense the chickens will come home from this strange situation.
So if something's coming that resembles 1929 even more than it does 2008, what should the average person be doing?
Hunkering down, I believe, is the American phrase.
Yeah.
Don't take chances. Don't make risky investments. Do not believe what the leading political or economic advisors are telling you. This is a very, very dangerous situation. Mr. Trump, in my own opinion, Mr. Trump is betting everything. His entire presidency, his legacy, in a desperate effort to get himself reelected, when the biggest single threat to all of that isn't the impeachment, as most people think. It's the timing of the next downturn. If that recession hits sometime in the next 6 months, he's done. He's finished as president. There's no way or nothing that's going to save him, with or without the impeachment, with or without some theatrical agreement at the last minute with China, which he's preparing for. These things are not going to work unless he can, among other things, by the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates and by the rest of the world's bank pumping in money. Everything is now bet on postponing, delaying for a bit further the recession we're due to have. And I'm afraid I have to tell you that when you push them back, recessions have a nasty habit of then being worse than they might have been if you'd allowed them to play through the capitalist economy earlier. It's like postponing a treatment for an illness. You risk it becoming much, much worse.
So I remember back in the 70s, I used to get this newsletter from Howard Ruff, who was this gold bug and,
Right.
all this kind of stuff. I'm guessing you're probably familiar with him. And
Yes.
one of the points he made was that in the late 1920s, early 1930s, the people who made it through okay were, one, people who were self-sufficient, who had farms and things like that. And number two, people who were very, very liquid. They had virtually no debt, and they owned pretty much everything they needed. Or number three, people who were in debt up to their eyeballs and could walk away from that debt. And the people who got really badly hurt were the people who had paid off half their mortgage, the people who had, who were going to lose all their equity because of the disaster, but and couldn't walk away from that. Does any of that make sense in looking at this, as a just an average person, a consumer?
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. You can, Ruff also told people to buy gold, as I recall.
Yes.
If you look at the gold price recently, it is going up as more and more people are beginning to think that hunkering down means getting rid of stocks, getting rid of all kinds of debt instruments, and holding on to gold in the expectation that that will be something of value when all the other things that supposedly are of value lose theirs. All of these are responses. Sometimes they're done excessively, of course. Since no one knows what the future will bring, there is no riskless way to invest. But again, the notion that we are going to escape the cyclical return of downturns that has plagued capitalism everywhere that system has settled in for a good 200, 250 years. The burden of proof has to be on people who think we've suspended all of that. We finally found the cure. That claim has been made so many times in the past. It's really only amazing to me that otherwise smart folks will indulge that fantasy yet again. The conclusion is be very, very careful about any debts you have, about any investments that may look too good to be true. They probably are.